name is Alfred Eboa. I work with Grameen Foundation as the director for the Africa region. And I am happy to welcome you all to this session on connecting women to agricultural digital services, pathways to scale. As many of you know, though majority of the world's smallholder farmers produce close to 2/3 of all food worldwide, their production continues to be susceptible to the impact of climate change, and they generally have poor access to information on good agricultural practices that could help them increase productivity. 50% of these smallholder farmers are in sub-Saharan Africa and East Asia, and these are normally women. Digitally supported agriculture extension services provide an opportunity to change this phenomenon. And what we are seeing is that the use of mobile phones and agricultural digital services hold a great promise to allow more trust, transparency, security, better access to information, financial inclusion, higher productivity and income for smallholder farmers, especially women farmers. It is, however, a known fact that digital technologies in agriculture are also associated with new risk, as access to these technologies continues to be unequal, and that the implementation of digital agriculture services might actually lead to the development of intra-rural digital divide. In fact, evidence suggests that only a small fraction of smallholder farmers in the global south are reached with digital agriculture services, and that women in particular have limited access to smartphones and other technologies in agriculture. What this means is that the use of agricultural digital services could potentially increase gender inequalities instead of reducing them, and therefore do more harm to women farmers and agribusinesses than good. Truth is that gender inequality in our physical world is indeed replicated in the digital world. What we know is that gender gap in digital agriculture services are twofold. One is the lack of digital access, and the other is seen in the limited use of digital agriculture services, which affects women's access to the full range of opportunities offered by digital in agribusiness and farming. The question, therefore, is what needs to be addressed to minimize the inequalities of access to digital agriculture technologies and their use for women farmers in particular? As implementers, are we taking into account household and community dynamics to facilitate positive farmer behavior changes and scaling of digital agriculture services? And are we deliberate about digital agriculture solutions being context specific to minimize the gender digital divide? Do our digital agriculture solution providers appreciate those conditions that influence the effective use of digital agriculture services? Clearly, there needs to be sufficient understanding of customer behavior and attitudes to cluster women market segments, so we are able to tailor digital agriculture services to gender roles along the crop value chain. It is a fact that women play different roles in the agricultural value chain and at the household production level. Women generally have more informal roles that are often smaller scale, localized, and invisible, and are therefore less likely to have access to digital agriculture services due to the cultural barriers, low literacy levels, and less disposable income. We also would have to be intentional about design approaches that looks at concrete examples where research and understanding of the lives of women farmers feed into the functionality of agricultural digital services and solutions for women and men in farming families. Probably, first understanding the range of digital agricultural services could help us assess which services fall within existing or planned capabilities of women farmers or women agribusinesses. and to better appreciate the barriers to women's adoption and use of digital agriculture services. The range of digital agriculture services could include information services, be it access to weather, price, or good agriculture practices information, agriculture advisory services delivered by a last mile field agent, supply chain management, right from managing the workflow at various stages of the agriculture cycle, market linkages, and mobile financial services, which normally includes mobile transfer, digital payment, savings, loans, and insurance. As implementers, we should be interested in how to access and also increase access to both the skills and functionality of women farmers to be able to use digital technologies and knowledge of how they are able to do so safely, securely, and with trusted information and protected data. Are female users of digital agriculture services able to even report difficulties in using digital agriculture services and technologies? How user-friendly are handsets and applications? And are digitized agriculture content available in local languages? These are valid issues of concern. In fact, are we even going beyond providing digital literacy training to only women to include male farmers and other significant others like family members of women to enable them to better understand the value of women digital agriculture services adoption? What is the value of localization of digital agriculture services and male engagement strategies to even reach more women with digital solutions? It is also imperative to increase the evidence base and availability of sex disaggregated data and more research to effectively design programs and initiatives that work to close the gender digital agriculture services divide for our women farmers and agribusinesses. Many projects have and continue to contribute to reducing gender digital divide in smallholder farming in the global south. An example of an initiative which is blazing new trails and that looks into the scaling of digital agriculture services with a focus on uptake and adoption by women is AgriPath. This initiative is looking into the broader issues of digital agriculture services and women, and is developing efficient and far-reaching digital advisory services that engage as many smallholder farming families as possible, particularly incorporating women and young people. This the AgriPath initiative is doing by developing technical innovations that foster changes in people's attitudes and social norms related to agriculture. The interest here is to explore who in the farming household has access to a mobile phone and thus digital services, as well as how agricultural decisions are made within the farming household. The goals of AgriPath is to test different digital agriculture services delivery models and use research data through the use of a mobile application called Farm Better, which will serve as a proxy for other digital agriculture solutions to assess barriers and factors leading to positive behavior change in the adoption of good agriculture practices, and then focus on efficient country and context-specific dissemination of sustainable farming methods within local communities. The project is aimed at 50,000 smallholder farmers in Burkina Faso, Uganda, Tanzania, India, and Nepal, as well as 250 private and state agriculture extension service providers. Scaling of the results in at least 6 other countries is planned from the outset via a broader partner network comprising ministries of agriculture, NGOs, the private sector, and regional and international organizations, thus enabling AgriPath to make the widest possible impacts. Lessons learned from AgriPath will be made available in a toolkit for providers of digital advisory services, both in countries where the project is active and worldwide. In addition, the project consortium made up of the University of Development and Environment, CDE, the University of Lausanne, Grameen Foundation, USA, Grameen Foundation, India, International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, CP, and Farm Better Limited will together provide long-term implementation and application support to digital providers by sharing our combined experiences in bringing sustainable agriculture to scale by identifying, evaluating, and promoting pathways for digital supported agriculture advisory services. We aim to facilitate a deep dialogue on how we can catalyze the adoption of digital agriculture services by women without doing harm, and by increasing the evidence base of how digital agriculture services works to empower not only women, but their households and communities as well. In this session, the project team is looking to facilitate an active dialogue with you and provide an avenue for exchanging experiences, inputs, and also making the relevant questions on one, barriers in access to digital agriculture technologies for women, in particular, in households with lower literacy and digital literacy rates, limited access to smartphones, socioeconomic status, and cultural norms. 2, design considerations for agriculture programs and agriculture technology solutions to better include women. And 3, how we can measure success in the adoption of agriculture technology by women globally and locally. The overall objective here is to better establish a better understanding of how women are disadvantaged in the provision of digital agriculture services and appreciate the value proposition of integrating gender approaches in the provision of digital agriculture services. Thank you for the attention and a very warm welcome to this session. We are happy to have you join us, and we look forward to a very productive engagement with you all. I will now invite my colleague Lakshmi to help with a description and mechanics of our breakout sessions and other logistics. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alfred, and thank you everybody for joining the session. My name is Lakshmi Iyer, and I'm with Grameen Foundation USA. A warm welcome to everybody again. At this time, I just wanted to let people know how these 90 minutes will play out. So what we have at this point will be a series of questions in a poll format that will show up on your screen, which will take into consideration the 4 different breakout session themes. So please do respond to those polling questions when they do pop up. Once we do have your responses, what we will do is have each of the facilitators of the breakout sessions speak about their sessions for about 1 to 2 minutes, which will then allow you all to make a decision with respect to which breakout session you'd like to attend. And so each of the facilitators will speak for a few minutes, and then there will be on the bottom of your screen a breakout room box that you'll be able to click, and you'll be able to join the breakout session of your choice. We will then be in the breakout session for about 30 minutes, where we will have an active dialogue about the particular topic led by the facilitator. A few things to mention while you're in that room. If you wouldn't mind ensuring that you use the raise hand function when you'd like to speak, that would be wonderful. This is just to ensure that we keep the background noise to a minimum. If you could please be sure your microphone is on mute when you are not speaking, that would be great. And then we also request that if you have a comment or a question for the chat box, if you could please indicate which breakout room you are in, that would get directed to the right facilitators. Once the 30 minutes is over, the tech organizers will then pull us back into plenary, where we will again see the poll questions so that we could have an understanding as to whether anything has shifted in audience perspectives, and we'll take it from there. So at this time, it would be great if we could have the polling results pop up, and then we can move into breakout. We'll need a few more minutes before the polling commences. I think if you do see the screen, please do respond to the 5 questions. We will give it a few more minutes for everybody to respond to the poll questions. As people are responding to the polling questions, it might be useful for us to start with our pitches for the breakout rooms. So I'd like to ask Nicole Harari, if you wouldn't mind, starting with your session pitch, climate, resilience, and women.
Yes, thank you, Lakshmi. We will be in room number 1 talking about women and climate resilient practices. There is a poll on that as well, and I see some interesting results already coming up from that one. And I am together with Prabhat from Grameen Foundation India, we will discuss with you 2 main topics, namely what are critical elements to support women in climate resilient agriculture. And the second one will be a topic I think all of us are very much into. It will be about scaling and adoption. So how can we facilitate large adoption of climate resilient agriculture, and particularly amongst women. So I hope you will join us in room number 1. Back to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you, Nicole. I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues from Farm Better, John and Sylvia, to provide a pitch for their breakout session.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I am John Choptiani, one of the co-founders of Farm Better. We are a social enterprise that provides farmers with access to over 1,200 peer-reviewed and geo-referenced farming practices to improve their resilience. And what we will be talking about in breakout session 2 is to explore lessons learned to date using Farm Better and working with other digital advisory tools and extension services, and looking specifically at barriers to adoption of digital advisory tools by women in agriculture. So looking at what are the challenges they face and what are the features and tools that need to be improved to increase adoption of women. So that'll be breakout room 2. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. I'd like to now pass it over to breakout session 3 facilitator, Brigitta.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our session today. I'm going to be in breakout room 3 with my colleague, Alfred from Grameen Foundation. And we're going to be looking at the value of localization as well as male engagement and power dynamics. So we'll be talking about localization of digital advisory services, discussing a few questions, wanting to learn about your experience. We'll talk about delivery models to hear and understand what works and what doesn't work. And I think most exciting is the role of the men in this conversation. So I look forward to having you join our breakout session. Thank you.
Great, and thank you so much, Brigitta. And the last breakout session, room 4, last but not least, will be led by my colleague, Minale.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So my name is Minale Kase. I work for the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology. In our session, we'll discuss on this extension model and women. As we all know, the classical extension service as it exists today is not necessarily inclusive and efficient and effective for a number of reasons that we are going to discuss in this session. And we also know that digital agricultural solutions, as described by my colleague Alfred, is not as such a silver bullet. That taking into account the challenges around accessibility, resource limitation, and the mobility. And of course, what we know was working right now is we have a research tool to monitor the effectiveness and measure the impacts of ICT4 extension. But still, we do believe there are a number of gaps that we would like to understand how digital agriculture extension supports farmers' vulnerability to shocks, how digital agriculture can help us to close the gender gap, the information gap, what delivery methods work for whom, and things like that. So which means in this session, specifically, we will discuss what research extension evidence and women we have to mainstream the digital agricultural extension to the existing extension system. What barriers do we have to mainstream this digital agricultural tools again to the extension system? What delivery methods we can use? And if we have success, how we can measure that success at different levels, could be nationally and globally. So please welcome us to join this breakout session.
Thank you so much, Manale. Before we break into the rooms, and before you hit the button on the bottom with respect to which room you'd like to go to, I just want to take a minute to see the poll results. I think that we have a number of people who've responded already. So it looks like with the statement number 1, climate resilient practices target men more rather than women. We have a majority of folks suggesting neutral. Application design does not need to be smallholder farmer centric. With that statement, we have a majority of participants suggesting strongly disagree. With integrating gender approaches to digital agricultural services is a fad or is not a viable solution, we're basically tied between strongly disagree and neutral. Content accessibility, affordability is more important than applying the gender lens. Disagree and agree. And there is enough government interest and will to promote and scale digital ag extension tools. Disagree. So these are interesting results, and we will have the same questions for all of you to respond to at the end of the breakout session time period so that we see if there's any shift in perspective. So at this time, it would be great if we could open up the breakout sessions. Please feel free to choose the room you'd like to actively participate in. We will see you back in plenary as the TAC organizers will pull us all back in about 30 minutes time period. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope these were very interesting and lively breakout sessions conducted. I hope everyone had a chance to hear more about the AgriPath Consortium as a whole, but also to share your experiences and wisdom with participants in the room. At this time, I think what we'd like to do is actually have 2 to 3 key points discussed that were discussed within each of the breakout rooms come into the plenary session. So perhaps we can go one by one from the breakout rooms and discuss some of these key points. I'll start with room number 1, which was led by my colleagues Nicole and Prabhat. If you'd like to take it away and give us your top 2 or 3 key lessons.
Sure, Lakshmi. Thanks. Nicole, do you want me to kind of just capture a couple of sentences, and then please, if I missed out on some of these important. So we had a good discussion. In fact, we had planned for 2 questions to debate, but the first question itself was so engaging that we couldn't actually devote time for the second question. So this was around what are the critical elements for adoption, and in the 2 buckets of technological versus and environmental. We had some really good inputs, some coming from CARE. Orally from CARE was talking about a gender lens that CARE uses, which is designed around 3 dimensions of the building agency, building relations, and structures around women. Because for women to really contribute, and be part of these resilience efforts, I think building her agency and empowerment becomes critical. So that was a really important point I thought came in. And of course, she also shared about the gender marker that CARE uses, which has a number of these elements: gender analysis, feedback, participation, engaging men and women, M&E systems, and all of that. There are again some very useful inputs coming from examples from Myanmar. Judith from UN Ops in Myanmar shared some examples around issue around women not having access to capital as a major barrier in preventing them from working on some of these initiatives, and then sharing some examples about not just access to capital, but how control over capital is an important issue, and how through training, capacity building, and women's peer networks through self-help groups or village savings and loan associations or savings groups, etc., can make that shift happen. They also talked about engaging various stakeholders, including the private sector. There were also some good examples coming from Bangladesh, where women have been given ID cards, working on land ownership. In India, work on setting up agri kiosks. Yeah, so overall, I think a lot of good inputs coming in, especially centered around women. How women can have greater agency and they can be connected to finances, connected to markets and other aspects. And also the onus not just being on the women, but also on the ecosystem, like engaging private sector and all of that. So those are some highlights I captured. But Nicole, please if I have missed any important point.
That was a perfect summary, I think, Prabhat. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Breakout Session 1, Prabhat and Nicole. Let's move now to our colleagues from Farm Better with Breakout Session 2, John and Sylvia. If you could give us your top 2 or 3 key takeaways from your session, please.
Thank you, Lakshmi. I'll present, or I'll give the highlights on behalf of session 2. So we had a really good discussion around the application design challenges, and we had 3 main areas. We wanted to get some general comments, and then we looked at the key features that should be included in a digital advisory app, and then we also looked at key barriers. So a lot of the comments and a few of the questions were around the areas of operation or the countries of operation of Farm Better, about literacy rates and how that has changed to support the use of digital tools, the business model of Farm Better, around how FarmBetter defines adoption, digital literacy being a precursor to promoting a digital tool, and if we have been able to get a sense of how female users or how users have an appetite or would pay for digital services. Then there's also a question around the partnerships and how that can support in incentivizing the use or the scaling of digital tools. On the side of the key features, it was quite interesting to look at how do you balance usability versus accessibility, and you're also taking more consideration in already existing apps or digital tools that are already in use in farming, especially farming communities, and how do we leverage those to have more access or reach more users with more information on digital or best practices or agricultural services. And how does that then, how as FarmBetter we can leverage on those tools, and what is it that we'll miss out if we, for example, had FarmBetter working via SMS? And so we discussed a bit of that. And then on the barriers, especially on the women, the barriers that affect women specifically in accessing digital advisory services, we understood, or we also agreed that time constraint versus the responsibilities that women have, so the competing attention, that different things that compete for attention of a woman in a household, how they have time to actually then have time to use and learn using a digital tool, and also the issue of smartphone access being a precursor or being the first thing that needs to be available for using FarmBetter. How then, for farmers who are older than 45 or may not have that digital literacy, how viable is a digital advisory service in a rural community? And then how do we work with young people to increase that uptake and to promote and to even bridge the gap between digital literacy and the use of digital advisory services? So yes, so I'll leave it at that point. Thank you so much, Lakshmi, and thank you everybody who came to our session.
Great, thank you, Sylvia and John. I'll now move to Brigitte with breakout room number 3 with some key points.
I will be the one to share the key points for our session.
Sorry, Gigi, please go ahead.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, so our session is about the value of localization, right, in the adoption of digital agriculture solutions rather. So for women to adopt DAS, it is very important to look at the support system that works for women. For example, who are the influencers in her life? Are there any peer groups or women's savings group that she belongs to? Who are the trusted leaders in her community? And are they women? Who are the extension coaches? And are they women? How does she get information on a day-to-day basis? What are the cultural norms regarding owning a mobile phone? Who is the household decision maker? To some, localization in the implementation of DAS is critical. And dealing with existing sociocultural barriers of males directly engaging women farmers to adoption by women is very important. So as an example, localization of DAS can be made through human-centered design to better understand the diversity of women's needs in that particular geography or country where you want to scale the DAS solution. We also need to incorporate functionality in tools that account for women's limited time and financial resources. And this is very important to consider because women are usually engaged in multiple activities. They cannot just sit down and spend 30 minutes trying to figure out an app. So it's very important that it's easy and it's also modular so that they can always come back to where they left it off. It is very important to also consider how information is shared, not only within the app itself or solution itself, but also within the household. And household dynamics become a very important component. Now, when we talk of household dynamics, it is very important that we do not forget the role of men. So male engagement is very important. And males can lead the process of finding innovative ways to transfer gender norms that affect access and the uptake of DAS. So a lot of the approaches in the past wherein only the women were consulted for the adoption of women in agriculture, in digital agriculture, we are now learning that without male engagement, that cannot be successful. So every time you have a DAS implementation, you have to consider power dynamics so that the delivery mechanism, whether it's through a coach or whether through it's a self-service or hybrid mechanism, can be made more effective and than the usual. But we have to also remember that there are unintended consequences when involving women, especially in terms of power struggle. And this is something that it's very easy to just close your eyes and forget about it. But these are exactly the day-to-day challenges why women do not adopt DAS. Therefore, it is very important that even at the household level, it is important to make them understand how they can be supportive of each other. An example of a tool that we use is gender dialogues. And it is a very effective approach to get women and men talk together and increase the tolerance and support for each other. There is a lot of value in agent-led model solutions. However, we should never forget that our objective is to move women, to self-service. And therefore, as we design our solutions and we look at these power struggles, these dynamics, it is important that our pathway gives them a little bit of a self-service, activity that they can build on. So an example of that is if the DAS itself cannot be self-service as the start, you can find ways of pulling in, little components that will allow them to exercise some kind of digital literacy. Example of that would be complementing it with IVR, SMS, or if radio is very popular with women, use radio as a complement. Then slowly build in that capability. So consider mass communication channels also, like farmer radio programming aired in local languages. It's very important to convert it to local languages and at times convenient to women to listen and call in to influence what gets discussed and directly ask questions. As to the question on whether women are more effective agents for women, so far, in our work in Grameen, the answer has been yes. And the main reason behind that, and we were asked this question during the breakout session, the main reason is that women are usually more tolerant and open with women. But of course, this is not a general statement and we'd like to improve that situation. So I hope that was helpful for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gigi. That was incredibly comprehensive and with a lot of really great insights. I'll move now to breakout room number 4, which was extension models and women. That was facilitated by Minale. I'll just give a really quick readout of some of the key points that came out of that session. But, largely we were talking about the existing agricultural extension structure and system not necessarily being efficient, effective, or inclusive, with many inter and intra-household asymmetry of information arising from some of these gaps. And so we had an individual from IRI speaking about developing a tool called the Rice Crop Manager and discussing the many different channels that the tool was being used to being mainstreamed. So her and her team were looking at non-government agencies, input suppliers, credit suppliers, universities, and specifically focusing on youth and women to help support the scaling of the tool. So that was a very interesting case study that we were discussing. We were also discussing the fact that often what we find, and this is also echoing a lot of what the other breakout sessions also were discussing, that there is oftentimes only one smartphone or one mobile phone that's available within the household. And so how do we ensure that women and men, as well as youth, are able to benefit from any applications or tools that are being developed via the phone? We didn't necessarily discuss gender dialogues, but that's a really great example of perhaps one of the solutions that could be leveraged for that. We also discussed awareness creation and conducting awareness creation workshops all the way down to grassroots level, and leveraging farmer groups to host these types of discussions so that the everybody within the household would be able to understand what some of these benefits are, and leverage the tool accordingly. So I'll pause here. And I think now what would be really great is if we could have the poll questions back up. The same 5 questions that all of you engaged with at the beginning of our session will now come up again. So we will be able to see if there are any shifts in perspectives, or if things have remained the same with those statements. So please take a minute to run through these 5 questions and give your responses. While everybody is responding to the poll questions, I wonder if anybody had any major questions, larger questions, umbrella questions that they'd like to pose to any of us or any of the other participants at this point of time. I see a question that's come up in the chat box with respect to land tenure systems. How can we ensure the land tenure systems in countries that prefer men to own lands change policy without creating much animosity? I wonder if Gigi, you'd want to take a stab at providing a response to that, or anybody else on the team? Or anybody have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, let me take a stab at it. So this will call for some kind of a wider, advocacy and regulatory changes in those contexts where men become default in terms of ownership of lands. And I think that it's a gradual process. And once you get male champions to understand the need to offer in some flexibility for women to also own lands, I think that once they get to understand and then they see the need for it, then you get males actually advocating for this to gradually change. So for me, I think that it's a gradualist approach, which requires some level of advocacy, awareness creation, and getting the males to lead this kind of conversations. Thank you.
Thanks, Alfred. That's great. A few more minutes on the polls. If you haven't responded, please do. It'd be great to have everybody's responses. Okay, it looks like we have a majority of individuals responding. So just quickly, if we could stop the polling and look at the results. Thank you so much. So it looks like with question number one, or statement number one rather, climate resilient practices target men more rather than women. The majority suggested agree. And if we remember in the pre-polling, the majority actually was unsure and had suggested neutral on that. So that's very interesting, and it looks like the lever has shifted a little bit on that one. With poll question number two, or statement number two, application design does not need to be smallholder farmer centric. The majority of individuals are suggesting strongly disagree. And it looks like we had the same perspective as an audience in the pre-polling as well. So that remained the same. Statement number three, integrating gender approaches to digital agricultural services is a fad or is not a viable solution. Strongly disagree does take the majority on this statement. And we had disagree/agree tied during pre. So it looks like people have moved towards the other extreme. Strongly disagree on that one. Content accessibility and affordability of digital agricultural solutions is more important than applying the gender lens. Looks like we are tied on disagree and agree on content, and we had disagree during pre-breakout sessions. So not a huge shift on that one. It's fair enough. And the last statement, there is enough government interest and will to promote and scale digital ag extension tools. The majority of individuals, 43%, suggested disagree. And during the pre-breakout sessions, we actually had strongly disagree come up. So there's been a small little shift in that one as well. So at this point, we're running out of time for this session. And so what I will do now is present our social media handles so that you can discuss AgriPath as a project during the ICTforAg 2022 conference, as well as any of the topics that were discussed here today. They're all poignant, and we really hope that this session has been useful. Please feel free to reach out to any of us after the session to continue the discussions and to talk about any of the work that we're about to undergo with respect to AgriPath. And we thank you so much for joining and for actively participating. It's been wonderful to see so many of us in this session and actively participating. So thank you very much.